There is a concept in physics known as a gravitational well. It's a region of space where the pull of a massive object is so immense that it becomes incredibly difficult to escape. Smaller bodies in the vicinity don't have a choice. They are pulled into an orbit, their path dictated not by their own will, but by the sheer overwhelming force of the giant next door. For generations, Canada has lived comfortably within the gravitational well of its closest neighbor, the United States. It has been a predictable, stable, and largely prosperous orbit. Our economies, our cultures, and our security have been deeply intertwined. But the laws of physics are changing. A new massive object has entered the system, China, and its gravitational pull is growing stronger every single day. Suddenly, Canada is no longer in a simple, binary orbit. It is caught between two competing, colossal forces. One is an old ally, our closest friend, who is now demanding absolute loyalty and telling us that in this new reality, America must come first. The other is a rising superpower, extending a hand of economic partnership, offering tantalizing opportunities, but with strings attached that remain shrouded in shadow. This is not a simple trade dispute. This is not about tariffs on steel or quotas on canola. This is a defining moment, a high-stakes, three-dimensional chess game being played on a global scale, and Canada is standing in the middle of the board. Every move, every decision, every alliance, forged or broken, will have consequences that echo for decades. This is the story of Canada's tightrope walk, a story of a middle power trying to find its footing in a world being reshaped by the clash of titans. The question we must now ask is no longer just about prosperity, it's about survival. Can Canada navigate this new, treacherous geopolitical landscape? Or is it destined to be crushed between the giants? The shadow of the eagle, the high cost of loyalty. To understand the depth of Canada's current dilemma, we must first acknowledge the foundation of our modern history. The post-World War II order was built on a simple premise: a strong, stable alliance of Western nations, led by the United States, standing as a bulwark against external threats. Canada was not just a participant in this order, it was a charter member, a cornerstone. This alliance was never purely military, it was profoundly economic. The 1965 Auto Pact is perhaps the most potent symbol of this integration. It wasn't a free trade agreement in the modern sense. It was a managed trade agreement that created a single, unified North American auto industry. For decades, parts and finished vehicles flowed seamlessly across the 49th parallel. An engine block might be cast in Ontario, shipped to Michigan for assembly, and installed in a car that is then sold in Quebec. This intricate dance created millions of jobs and generated billions of dollars in shared prosperity. Our supply chains became so deeply interwoven that for many industries, the border was little more than a line on a map. This economic marriage was built on a bedrock of trust and predictability. Canadian businesses invested, expanded, and hired, confident that the rules of the game would remain stable. But then the rules changed. The rise of the America First doctrine under the Trump administration represented a seismic shift in this relationship. The language of partnership and mutual benefit was replaced by the harsh, transactional language of leverage and national interest. Suddenly, our deeply integrated supply chains were no longer seen as a source of shared strength, but as a vulnerability for the United States. The Commerce Secretary's blunt statement that in the auto industry, America comes first and Canada comes second, was not a gaffe. It was a declaration of intent. It was a signal that the decades of cooperation were now being reevaluated through a zero-sum lens. If American factories needed more jobs, Washington made it clear that they were willing to take them from anywhere, including from their closest and most loyal ally. This was not a theoretical threat. It had real-world consequences. The imposition of Section 232 tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, citing national security concerns, was a particularly jarring blow. For Canada, a country that had fought alongside the United States in every major conflict for a century, the idea that our steel exports could be considered a threat to American national security was not just absurd, it was insulting. It demonstrated that the old rules of loyalty and shared history no longer applied. The fallout was immediate. Steel mills in Hamilton and Sault Ste. Marie faced immense uncertainty. Workers who had spent their entire lives in the industry suddenly worried about their pensions, their mortgages, and their futures. The Canadian government was forced into a reactive position, imposing retaliatory tariffs on a wide range of American goods, from ketchup to washing machines. This wasn't a strategic choice, it was a necessary defense. But it came at a cost, raising prices for Canadian consumers and straining businesses that relied on American imports. The pattern became painfully clear. Each time Canada aligned itself with Washington in a broader geopolitical dispute, particularly against China, it ended up bearing a disproportionate cost. When Canada, at the request of the U.S., detained Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou, it was Canada that suffered the consequences. Two Canadian citizens, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, were arbitrarily detained by Beijing in a clear act of hostage diplomacy. For over 1,000 days, they became pawns in a superpower conflict that Canada had been dragged into. Meanwhile, Canadian agricultural exports, particularly canola and pork, were hit with punitive, non-tariff barriers by China. Prairie farmers who had spent years building relationships and trust in the Chinese market watched their livelihoods evaporate overnight. The irony was crushing. By demonstrating unwavering loyalty to its southern neighbor, Canada gained little in return. There was no preferential treatment, no exemption from the America First agenda. Instead, that loyalty was rewarded with economic threats and a clear message. In the New World Order, you are on your own. This has forced a painful but necessary reckoning in Ottawa and across the country. The foundational assumption of Canadian foreign policy, that our interests would always be fundamentally aligned with those of the United States, has been shattered. The shadow of the eagle, once seen as a protective shield, now feels more like a source of unpredictable and often damaging interference. It begs the question, what is the purpose of a friendship if the terms are dictated entirely by the stronger friend? This growing sense of disillusionment created a vacuum, and into that vacuum stepped the other giant. The Dragon's Gambit, a tempting and risky offer. As Washington's rhetoric grew more hostile, Beijing's grew more seductive. China's offer to Canada, delivered by its ambassador, was a masterstroke of diplomatic and economic statecraft. It was simple, direct, and brilliantly timed. The proposal was a quid pro quo. If Canada removes its 100% tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles, Beijing will immediately lift its retaliatory tariffs on Canadian agricultural products, most notably canola. On the surface, this appears to be a straightforward trade negotiation, a win-win. Prairie farmers would regain access to a multi-billion-dollar market. Canadian consumers would get access to affordable, technologically advanced electric vehicles, helping to accelerate the country's transition to a green economy. But this offer is far more than a simple trade deal. It is a gambit. It's a calculated move on the global chessboard, designed to achieve several strategic objectives at once. First, it seeks to drive a wedge between Canada and the United States. By presenting a clear, tangible benefit that Washington is unwilling or unable to offer, Beijing is forcing Ottawa to make a choice. Continue to follow the American line on trade, even when it hurts the Canadian economy, or act in its own perceived national interest. It's a test of Canada's loyalty to the Western Alliance. Second, it's about securing a critical beachhead in the North American market for China's most important emerging industry, electric vehicles. China is not just a participant in the EV race. It is dominating it. Companies like BYD, NIO, and XPeng are producing high-quality, innovative vehicles at a scale and price point that Western automakers are struggling to match. The 100% tariff, which Canada adopted in lockstep with the United States, is one of the only things preventing these vehicles from flooding the market. If Canada were to remove that barrier, it would become the gateway for Chinese EVs into North America. This would be a massive strategic victory for Beijing. But the gambit goes deeper still. It's not just about selling cars, it's about controlling the entire supply chain of the 21st century economy. The green transition depends on a handful of critical minerals: lithium, cobalt, nickel, and rare earth elements. China currently dominates the processing and refining of these minerals, giving it a chokehold on the global production of batteries, wind turbines, and other green technologies. Canada is one of the few countries in the world with significant untapped reserves of these same minerals. Beijing's long-term play is not just to sell Canada electric vehicles, but to secure access to the raw materials needed to build them. This creates the potential for a dangerous form of dependency. It's a Faustian bargain. In the short term, reopening the canola market is incredibly tempting. But in the long term, does Canada risk trading its dependency on an unpredictable American ally for a dependency on a strategic and often coercive Chinese rival? The risks are immense and well documented. We have already seen how Beijing uses trade as a political weapon. The arbitrary bans on canola and pork were not based on science. They were instruments of political punishment. There is the ever-present threat of intellectual property theft, and there are profound national security concerns. The debate over allowing Huawei to participate in Canada's 5G network provided a stark preview of the challenges ahead. Allowing Chinese state-influenced companies deep access to critical sectors of our economy, whether it's telecommunications or the energy grid, comes with risks that cannot be easily dismissed. China's offer is not an act of benevolence. It is a calculated strategic move by a patient, long-term player. It's an invitation to step out of America's shadow and into a new, potentially lucrative, but also profoundly uncertain economic sphere of influence. It places Canada on the horns of a seemingly impossible dilemma. To refuse the offer is to leave billions of dollars of agricultural exports on the table and continue to suffer the economic consequences of a trade dispute we did not start. To accept the offer is to risk alienating our most important security and trading partner, while opening the door to a new set of economic and security vulnerabilities. This is the central challenge for Canadian statecraft in the 21st century. There is no easy answer. Both paths are fraught with peril. So, is there a third way? Is there a path that leads not to dependency, but to genuine independence? The middle path, a strategy for sovereignty. Being caught between two giants does not have to be a death sentence. For a well-positioned, strategic middle power, it can be a source of leverage. But it requires a fundamental shift in thinking, a shift away from the comfortable, reflexive alignment of the past and towards a more agile, clear-eyed, and independent foreign policy. This is the middle path. It is not a path of neutrality or isolationism. It is a path of strategic balance and diversification. The first or most crucial step on this path is to reduce our dependencies. For decades, over 75% of Canada's exports have gone to a single country, the United States. This has been a source of stability, but it is now a source of profound vulnerability. A downturn in the U.S. economy or a hostile move by a protectionist administration can send shockwaves through our entire system. True economic sovereignty requires a deliberate, sustained effort to diversify our trade relationships. We have already taken important steps in this direction. The Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, or CETA, with the European Union has opened up the world's largest single market to Canadian goods and services. The Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, or CPTPP, connects us to a dynamic and fast-growing bloc of Pacific nations, from Japan and Vietnam to Australia and Chile. These are not just trade agreements. They are strategic pillars of an independent foreign policy. They are our escape hatches from the gravitational pull of the North American continent. But signing the deals is the easy part. The real work is in helping Canadian businesses, from small startups to large corporations, navigate these new markets and build the relationships needed to succeed. It requires a national effort, a Team Canada approach to global trade. The second pillar of the middle path is to move up the value chain. For too long, Canada has operated on a colonial economic model. We dig raw materials out of the ground, minerals, oil, timber, and we ship them overseas for other countries to process into high-value finished goods, which we then buy back at a premium. This is a losing game. Nowhere is this more critical than in the race for the green economy. The Ring of Fire region in northern Ontario has been called the Saudi Arabia of critical minerals. We have vast world-class deposits of the lithium, nickel, and cobalt needed to build the batteries of the future. The path of dependency is to simply award the mining rights to foreign state-owned companies who will ship the raw ore to Asia for processing, creating jobs and capturing value over there. The path of sovereignty is to build the processing plants, the refineries, and the battery gigafactories right here in Canada. It means using Canadian minerals processed by Canadian workers to build Canadian batteries that power Canadian-made electric vehicles. This is not a pipe dream. It is a strategic imperative. It will require significant public and private investment, a clear industrial strategy, and the political will to see it through. But the payoff would be immense. High-paying, future-proof jobs, a secure domestic supply chain for our most important industries, and a leadership role in the global green economy. The third pillar of the middle path is to strengthen our alliances with other middle powers. Canada is not alone in this dilemma. Countries like Australia, Japan, South Korea, and Germany are all grappling with the same challenge: how to navigate the intense rivalry between the United States and China. There is strength in numbers. By coordinating our policies, by sharing intelligence, and by presenting a united front on key issues like trade rules and international law, we can amplify our influence and create a counterbalance to the pressures from both Washington and Beijing. We can work together to reform and strengthen the very institutions that are being undermined by the return of great power politics, like the World Trade Organization. This requires active, engaged, and creative diplomacy. It means seeing ourselves not as a junior partner in an American-led world, but as a leader and a convener in our own right. This middle path is not easy. It is far more difficult than simply choosing a side. It requires a long-term vision, a tolerance for complexity, and a renewed sense of national purpose. It requires us to finally stop defining ourselves by who we are not American, not European, and to start defining ourselves by who we are: an innovative, resource-rich, and strategically positioned nation with a unique role to play in the world. The world is fracturing. The era of predictable alliances and stable global rules is giving way to a more chaotic and competitive age. For a country like Canada, this new reality presents both immense challenges and historic opportunities. We stand at a defining crossroads, a moment of profound national choice. Down one path lies the familiar comfort of the past. We can remain in America's shadow, accepting our role as a junior partner, our economic and foreign policy dictated by the shifting political winds in Washington. It is a path of perceived safety, but it comes at the cost of our autonomy and increasingly our prosperity. Down the other path lies the seductive allure of the dragon's gambit. We can pivot towards China, embracing the short-term economic benefits while accepting the long-term risks of entanglement with an authoritarian regime that does not share our values. It is a path of potential wealth, but it comes at the cost of our security and our principles. But then there is the third path, the middle path, the path of sovereignty. It is the most difficult path. It requires us to be more strategic, more diversified, and more self-reliant than ever before. It requires us to invest in our own industries, to control our own resources, and to build alliances with other nations who share our desire for a world governed by rules, not by might. This is more than a question of foreign policy. It is a question of national identity. Will we be a satellite, forever caught in the orbit of a greater power? Or will we be a navigator, charting our own course through a complex and changing world? The choice is not up to the politicians in Ottawa alone. It is a choice that belongs to all of us. It will be made in our boardrooms, in our universities, in our resource sectors, and in our national conversation. The signals from both superpowers have been sent. The chessboard is set. Now it's Canada's move. What do you think that move should be? What does a truly independent Canadian foreign policy look like to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching.